Meet a multimillionaire who wants to pay his fair share of taxes. And by the way, he's not alone. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. With us, the entrepreneur, co-founder, and partner of Second Avenue Partners, his website, Nick Hanauer, HANAUER.com. And Nick, and also Nick Hanauer is his Twitter handle. Nick, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we talked.
How are you?
I'm good. You know, and I think my situation is probably similar to much of middle class America. The majority of my wealth is tied up in my home, and every year I have to pay a tax on that wealth, on basically my money bin. You know, on the store of wealth that is my wealth, and it's called a property tax. And and I also pay it on the other piece of property I have, my car. And I don't get it why billionaires don't have to pay a property tax or a wealth tax on their money bins the way that probably I think 68% of Americans own their own homes. 68% of Americans are paying a wealth tax every year, and those who rent are paying it indirectly by because it's built into their rent. Why don't billionaires have to do that?
Well, I mean, is the answer 45 years of neoliberal economic policy sufficient for you?
Yeah, but it's a little wonky. You want to boil that down?
Well, I mean, you raise, I think, a really important issue, which is why. The straight up answer to your question is because we have an economic system and a tax system built by people like me for people like me. And
as a rich guy,
and obviously there are a lot of ways in which wealthy citizens used to pay, used to contribute more to the society than we do now, and that sort of relentless downward pressure on, sort of downward force on the amount of help we give the society is a consequence of a bunch of really bad economic ideas. But I think that straight up, you're right that we have to find ways to equalize it. And certainly a common sense way to think about it is if most middle class people are already paying effectively a property tax, a wealth tax on their property, why don't people who have assets that are greater than one home paying the same tax? And it's a really good question. And obviously, if we did, things would be a lot fairer and a lot better for most people.
This is largely the case in most of the rest of the developed world, isn't it? I haven't done a country by country survey, but I know that England for a long time had a wealth tax. I think they might have gotten rid of it with the Thatcher government. I'm not sure, but do you know the history?
Wealth taxes, I don't. I'm not a domain expert in the wealth tax. There have been places where wealth taxes have been used, and France is, I think, a good example where I think they did not implement it in a particularly effective way. And obviously, income is quite easy to measure. Wealth is slightly harder in many, many cases. What is a private business worth, for example? What if I have a painting? What is that worth? It's just slightly more complicated. But I think, Tom, what I think is really important is that you're raising, the meta issue, which is why is it that let me just tick off a couple of examples. Why is it that middle class people pay up to about a 38 or 39% tax on their income, but wealthy people who make dividends or capital gains as income pay only 20%? Like, what the hell? Like, what kind of sense does that make? Here's an even more egregious example. Why is it that middle class people who earn up to about $140,000 pay effectively 12.5% of their income in payroll taxes, but people who make $20 million a year, for which that first $140,000 is de minimis, actually doesn't matter, pay 0% payroll tax on 99.9% of their income. Right? Like,
right.
How does that make sense?
Well, it doesn't this, Nick Hanauer, doesn't this demonstrate the problem of having politically active billionaires being given by the Supreme Court in 76 in the Buckley decision, 78 in the Bellotti decision, 2010 in Citizens United, given carte blanche to basically buy politicians and own them?
Yeah, for sure. And, you and I both agree that, radical inequality is toxic to economies and democracies, not least of which because it is a self-reinforcing feedback loop, right? The richer I get, the more influence I have. The more influence I have, the more I can bend the rules, the norms, and the policies to make myself even richer and more powerful. And today, the United States is largely a plutocracy, right, where the voices of the few and the wealthy, drown out, the voices of the majority. And that is, look, and there are all sorts of ways to see how deleterious that is. This insane semi-revolution we had a few weeks ago being just one tiny example of how the country can come off the rails if most people don't feel like the country is operating in their interest. So,
right, Nick, we just have 2 minutes until we hit a hard break here. I had somebody call into the show the other day and said, what about a maximum income? We have minimum income. Why not have a maximum income? And I pointed out the UK had that in 1776, and it was to prevent the emergence of a middle class. But we functionally had that with a top tax rate of 91% and 74% when Reagan came into office. And that's why CEOs typically never took more than $3 million a year until the mid-1980s. Isn't it time to reconsider rolling back not just the Trump tax cuts and the Bush tax cuts, but also the Reagan tax cuts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I don't think that a maximum income is practical, but taxing great wealth at high levels, both to raise revenue, but also just to renorm the society and pull it closer, pull everyone closer together, I think is a very, very important thing. And I will admit that my mind has changed over time about this. I didn't used to think that the distance between the bottom and the top was something that we should worry about. But I now feel very strongly that isn't the case, that it actually does matter, that it is possible for somebody at the bottom to get to the top. And if it's too far apart, it's not practical. So that's my view.
Wilkerson and Pickett have done some brilliant research on this with the Equality Trust out of the UK that as inequality increases, all kinds of social ills. Teenage pregnancy goes up as a result of inequality.
Mental health, everything else like that. And that's because people have to recognize that humans are social creatures. And if you stretch the society apart, most people feel like they're failures.
Yep. Nick Hanauer, co-founder and partner with Second Avenue Partners, Pitchfork Economics. NickHanauer.com is the website. Nick, thanks, and at Nick Hanauer on Twitter. Nick, thanks a lot for dropping by. It's great talking. It's always great talking to you. Thank you.